higher education becomes a really interesting endpoint in the book. In fact, in some ways, right, the book itself is a kind of meta-narrative for that. The ways in which the boundaries between the university and the broader community out there sort of come together in this discussion of what it means to be Black Los Angeles from the perspective of a bunch of scholars either associated with or in and around or motivated by the work at the Bunche Center. So with that, I will turn it over to our much more distinguished panelists.
Okay, you'll have to give me the hook.
I sure will.
I read all of as assigned by Diane Hunt, and I appreciate you inviting me. I read all of my chapters, so I'm prepared to answer and talk about the questions that you assigned us to do. So in that context, I want to talk about the 4 chapters in this book in general and respond to what I read. I just want to mention that in the Black Panther Party, I was shaped by the party's analysis, and the analysis that we used, generally speaking, was called dialectical materialism, so that we looked at objective facts as opposed to subjective concepts about what I think and what I believe and who I am and how you feel about me and whether my pants are hanging down and things of this type. We tried to look at more objective factors as to how people came to this and what we needed to do. Our goal was liberation, and that remains my goal, liberation of Black people, because I contend that we still are an oppressed group. Now, within this context, therefore, I looked at this book and I saw the one thing that was an overarching theme is that there was a sort of lack of real ideology. There was no real ideological bond that brought all of these elements together. And since I like to think that I maintain a revolutionary ideology, I wanted to look at the book from that perspective. I felt that considering that revolutionary change had something to do with freedom, I think about Dr. King calling for the Poor People's Campaign and the redistribution of wealth, meaning a complete fundamental change in America. And so these things, I couldn't see the trees for the forest, but saw the forest for the trees. So when we began to talk about the theme of Black Los Angeles and in the introduction, and as well as in the chapters on action, one of the things that I saw was happening is that there seemed to be some kind of a notion that Los Angeles somehow represented the possibility of Black people getting a piece of the American pie, and that actually was the dream, to get a piece of the American pie, and that LA sort of proffered that realization of that dream, as opposed to the dream of Dr. King, for example, for all of our people to be free and have housing and so forth and so on. And so when I lived here for a while, but it's not important whether I lived here, because, you know, people say, well, I'm from Los Angeles. I'm not. I mean, Black people from the South or from Africa. So you say, what is it, Los Angeles, West Coast, East Coast? I mean, in any case, the nexus, though, that was made between the Hollywood image factories, which has been talked about in almost every panel, is really incredible to me, because I think about, well, how did this all start? Well, it started, you know, and when you read David Levering Lewis's book on Du Bois, you find that one of the things that started Hollywood was Louis B. Mayer producing Birth of a Nation. Is this the image that we're just chasing after to be a part of? You want to talk about Boys in the Hood and haven't said a word about Birth of a Nation, which is the foundation of the Hollywood that we say we came to find a dream in. This is the dream that we want to be a part of. This was a nightmare. Louis B. Mayer used the NAACP to suggest that once they saw it, they would be so angry about it, all the white people in America would hurry up and rush, and created the whole Hollywood industry. This is the same Hollywood that gave us also Gone with the Wind and the success of that. Now, is this the dream that we're actually chasing? And let us talk about some facts here, and not some kind of images and some kind of thinking about what we're saying, but actually look at it. So then in the context of that, I looked at the Bass chapter, the Bass chapter, and this idea that was presented of a Black womanist leadership style, because that was the centerpiece of discussion of these two Black women here in Los Angeles, and it sort of congealed into a theory that there was a different kind of leadership style that Black women brought from Los Angeles, and I had, you know, I had trouble understanding what that exactly meant in terms of the relevance to our liberation struggle. Even though there was a discussion on foster care, there was no real discussion on why foster care, so many Black children have been abandoned, and what are the elements that brought so many Black children to foster care, and what was the solution going to be. I also had problems with the concept of relative freedom of Blacks in Los Angeles. I just don't know what relative freedom actually means, and it wasn't really explained. I thought the Lancer chapter was wonderful in that it showed these wonderful women really fighting an uphill battle, and particularly even against black elected officials to get rid of this waste project that was running through the black community. But this was during the Bradley era, and we're now. And so what we don't have is that kind of energy to surround it, but I think it was instructive that at least black people were talking about environmental issues, environmental justice. The Sula chapter, Security Officers United in LA, I had some comments and thoughts about, was this really a labor issue or what? Having grown up in with a woman who was a labor organizer and been a worker all my life and so forth, I understood the concept of labor, but then I had an idea about, was this the job we were dreaming of in Los Angeles, to be a security officer for a building of capitalists and make sure that their stuff doesn't get stolen? And I felt that there was something, an ideological underpinning that was missing from this concept of service workers. And while I think workers should be paid well, let us talk about what work is good and challenge people like William Julius Wilson, who invents the Clinton administration's welfare to work program that says it's all right for us to continue in these menial tasks. Lastly, I want to mention the Reclaiming UCLA chapter and make note that the saddest part is that the goal only has been, and we haven't even accomplished. So when people talk about you can get a nursing job or you can get a job doing this, you can't get it coming through UCLA if you're black, because the percentages are not here, and we haven't fought to bring more black children into these colleges, and we haven't created the conditions for that. So when we criticize and when we have this attitude about these young brothers in the hood, let us try to understand that we are all in the hood, and if you don't want to think that you are in the hood and that Los Angeles is some special dream for black people, there's no critical analysis, and I hope that that's what we'll do here today.
Thank you, sister. Well, I much like Elaine, have some issues that with the book, but I want to try to forge this ahead in a positive manner. Talking about activism is something that we all are challenged with, and we all must be challenged with today. Not just looking at the book and looking at the issues of space and people and Halada Bass and Karen Bass and images in Hollywood. I mean, there are some tremendous growth issues that have occurred for us as black people. They just happen to us in the space where we occupy. But they happen for black people all over the country, whether you were in New York, whether you were in New Orleans, whether you were in Los Angeles. I mean, this is, the issues that confront black people, no matter where black people are. And the issues of activism have to be borne out and have to be promulgated by black people. Every one of these issues in this book is connected to activism. There is nothing about images that is disconnected from activism. While you talk about Soul Train and you talk about Solar, you got to go behind that and you got to know the history. You got to know the fight that Griffey was in with the major record company in order to build the building, in order to keep the building, in order to demonstrate that he was a black man that was independent, that was empowered, and refused to shuffle and buck dance for white people. That's the reality of what came out of Solar. The music, black people been creating music, it's getting whistled better than white folks can sing. I mean, this ain't nothing new. But we have got to recognize activism is what we make it. We got to do it today. You got to, Don Carnegie, you talk about Soul Train. Soul Train wasn't fueled by black people dancing. It was fueled by advertising. And this brother was constantly challenging white America to give him the advertising that Dick Clark got. He was in a major conflict with them. And I happened, thankfully, to be a friend and to be spawning that and to be part of that, to try to make sure that we put pressure from the outside, whether it was demonstrating, whether it was getting sisters like Elaine, all over the country, everybody who was willing to fight for the survival of black people, we were willing to call on. And in most instances, they were willing to come. But they have to be called first. That's what activism is about. Activism is about standing up and fighting for your right. It doesn't matter who you are. It really doesn't matter that you're Al Sharpton We're here at UCLA, we're talking about issues, part of the book about the issue of challenging UCLA and the number of black people here. I used to work at UCLA. Back in 1967, I resigned in protest, called Chuck Young a motherfucker, because he was not willing to do anything that was proactive for black people. Elaine and others fought for us to have the right. When I first came to UCLA, there were no black people working in the kiosks, the guards that direct you for where you park. They said that job was over our head. We couldn't pass the test. That's what kind of test a nigga need in order to direct your car from one spot to another. I mean, this is ridiculous. But the point is, today, we are fighting for the same things. So the activism that we needed then to get the brothers and sisters working at UCLA, we need today. The only way we're going to get black people to come and to get in this university is we are going to have people power. We are going to have to demonstrate that we will paralyze this university before we allow black and white people to enjoy all the fruits and benefits of Los Angeles or America, and black people be locked out. But you got to have courage, you got to have passion, you got to have commitment to yourself, to our people, and to the future of our children. I can go on and on and on. But I'm telling you, every single chapter in this book is about not only the issues that it raises, but it's about activism, and activism has to be spawned, yes ma'am, spawned today by you and me. Thank you.
I love it when your panelists answer the questions before you can ask them. So that means that we can get to the business of actually discussing them. Because one of the questions to be asked at this point is what are some of the things that could be holding or are holding, in the panelist view, Black Los Angeles back from acting, from addressing the major problems that exist here. And you know, what I hear, I mean, even in Elaine Brown's description of what was missing, at least in her view of in the chapters, the notion of ideology. I'm also hearing an absence of agitation from the outside, a theme that's in the book. You know, the book has lots of things that are, again, national themes, but also local themes, in the sense of, you see a story of the demise of certain institutions. And one of the institutions that is, to me, seems a quintessentially Los Angeles, California institution is the Black Panther Party. And so to the extent, you know, we're connecting some of these things, the demise of the Black Panther Party is as integral to the different chapters of the book, even though I agree, there's not an ideological message, there's not a coherent connection, but there is a story of telling certain facts that kind of recur as probably the catalyst for some of the problems, and then I think through that maybe there's the lens back to, you know, what is the catalyst towards the action. So let me ask if that's correct. Am I hearing from you both, and then also I'm hearing on this side that maybe there is activism, there is agitation, and we know that to be true. I mean, we do know that to be true, but you're describing a different model, saying that, again, maybe this is the way in which Los Angeles may be different, maybe somewhat exceptional, maybe the way Los Angeles action takes place has either changed over time, you know, that we've seen the demise of the Black Panther Party, we've seen there was a movement there, and I think what we hear, not just in Los Angeles, but around the country, is that, you know, what replaces those movements? Is there a current movement? And frankly, the movement we all hear about when we turn on the TV now is the Tea Party movement, a movement that is completely regressive, and where the ideology that is being presented to us is an ideology of regression. And California, the other stories of California that ride throughout this book are stories of regression through propositions. So whether that's Prop 14, Prop 13, Prop 209, Prop 8, these are all here. So I will ask the question, but I wanted to acknowledge that I've heard some of these answers already. But I think the question we'd like to hear from this panel, because you have expertise in this issue, is, you know, what are the ingredients that are